Exposition is a key term in the narratology of fiction, encompassing two distinct referents. It can be understood as either narrative content or as a craft technique. When discussing exposition as narrative content, we focus on the what, the information conveyed about the story world itself, such as details about characters, plot, or setting. This perspective stays within the fictional world, treating the exposition as part of the reality experienced by the characters. In contrast, when considering exposition as a craft technique, we focus on the how, the methods and strategies the author uses to communicate this information to the audience. This perspective steps outside the story world, analyzing the techniques employed to make the information accessible, engaging, and effective for the reader. Exposition as narrative content involves a curated selection of information deliberately integrated into the story. This encompasses both necessary exposition and enriching exposition. Necessary exposition is vital for understanding critical elements of the core narrative events that are not immediately discernible or might not be readily inferable from their dramatization. Enriching exposition, though not strictly necessary, serves to deepen the world, elaborate on secondary details, reinforce themes, and enhance the audience's immersion in the story, while expanding upon elements that would otherwise remain ambiguous or underdeveloped. Now, returning to exposition as a craft technique, that is, the methods and strategies used to deliver both necessary and enriching exposition to the audience. There are two primary approaches: direct and indirect. First, the direct expositionary approach refers to the explicit delivery of information that does not rely on inference, interpretation, or contextualization through dramatized actions or dialogue. Such direct exposition is conveyed primarily through two methods: direct expository dialogue and direct expository narration. Direct expository dialogue involves dialogue that lacks strong dramatic necessity and serves to provide information directly to the audience rather than emerging naturally from character interactions. It occurs within the framework of dramatization, but is not truly part of it, as it prioritizes delivering information over advancing the story naturally. While it takes place through character interaction in the story world, its contrived explanatory nature often disrupts immersion, blurring the line between indirect and direct exposition. Examples include characters telling each other information they would already know, which can feel contrived or overly explicit, or exchanges where characters repeat details that don't naturally fit into the conversation, breaking the immersion. Direct exposition may also be conveyed through direct expository narration, which delivers information through a narrator, untethered to dramatized events or character interactions, offering explicit context, background, or commentary to the audience. This can include the author directly explaining details to the audience, which can also feel forced or disengaging. While direct expositionary narration is typically delivered by a narrator outside the story world, such as an omniscient author or external commentator, it can also occur within the story world when an in-world narrator provides information. In both cases, direct expositionary narration functions primarily as exposition rather than dramatization. Although the direct expositionary approach is often essential for conveying necessary exposition, it should be used sparingly. Overuse can disrupt narrative flow, disengage the audience, and break immersion. Enriching direct exposition, while optional and less urgent, is even more difficult to execute successfully. When overused or poorly integrated, it can especially hinder narrative flow, diminishing both the pacing and the overall impact of the story. The show don't tell rule advises writers to avoid using direct exposition, whether necessary or enriching, unless absolutely necessary. These methods of exposition should only be employed when it is theoretically impossible to incorporate the required information indirectly. I say theoretically because what may seem impossible for one author could be possible for another with greater skill or experience. In any case, the key is that necessary direct exposition and enriching direct exposition should be used only when all other methods of indirect exposition have been exhausted, ensuring that exposition is integrated into the story as naturally as possible. The second approach to exposition as a craft technique is the indirect expositionary approach. This involves the subtle or covert delivery of exposition through dramatized actions, subtextual dialogue, or setting, seamlessly integrating information into the narrative. This approach can be delivered in three ways, either through external indirect exposition, embedded indirect exposition, or through embedded expository narration. Let's look at each. External indirect exposition occurs outside the main narrative. That is, it happens externally to the primary narrative flow. It uses tools like flashbacks, prologues, or non-linear sequences to provide background information. Embedded indirect exposition is where information is gradually revealed within the core narrative through dramatic actions, subtextual dialogue, or the setting itself. It is indirect because the information is not explicitly stated, but rather implied or revealed through context. Then, embedded expository narration refers to exposition delivered by an in-world narrator, subtly integrated into the flow of the story, arising naturally within the narrative and remaining contextually grounded, while being tethered to the dramatized events or character interactions and blending with the surrounding action rather than serving as an external commentary. Although embedded expository narration involves narration, which inherently lacks dramatization, it is conveyed subtly while remaining tethered to the dramatized events. As a result, it does not fully align with either direct or indirect exposition, but instead it blends elements of both. This positions it as a hybrid technique that combines aspects of both direct and indirect exposition without fully conforming to either. The cornerstone of indirect exposition is dramatization, where a story's events unfold within the narrative world through actions and dialogue, allowing the audience to experience it directly without reliance on a narrator. Dramatization creates immediacy by showing characters engaging, making choices, and confronting consequences in real time, inviting interpretation of their meaning and significance without overt guidance or commentary. Good writers prioritize showing or dramatizing over telling or direct exposition. They aim to minimize the use of all forms of direct exposition. As stated, not all forms of exposition involve telling. Only direct exposition falls into that category. When deciding to include exposition, first assess whether the information is essential or enriching, and therefore qualifies to be included in the story. If the information does qualify as either essential or enriching, prioritize finding ways to integrate it indirectly rather than directly in order to maintain the narrative's flow. So far, we've explored the concept of exposition and its various forms. As narrative content, exposition should be either essential or enriching, otherwise it should not be included in the story. As a technique, exposition can be delivered either directly or indirectly. Direct exposition conveys content explicitly, either through a narrator separate from the dramatized events, or through dialogue that lacks strong dramatic necessity. Indirect exposition, on the other hand, is conveyed through dramatized events, either within the narrative or externally, and may or may not involve an in-world narrator tied to the events. The practical application of exposition extends far beyond simply determining whether it is information that is essential or enriching, and deciding then if it can be delivered indirectly. For instance, it involves mastering techniques for balancing information density, seamlessly integrating exposition with core dramatization, and adapting it to suit different media formats and lengths. Exposition as narrative content is distinct from backstory. Backstory encompasses all pre-narrative history related to the character's setting or plot. While some of this historical information may be selectively incorporated into the story through direct or indirect exposition, not all backstory is conveyed within the narrative. Indeed, much of the backstory remains outside the story's delivery. In short, not all backstory is, or rather becomes, exposition. Exposition differs from backstory in that it may or may not draw from the historical details of the backstory. As narrative content, exposition includes any information presented within the story world, whether or not it originates from the backstory. As a craft technique, the distinction is even clearer. Exposition refers to the methods used to present backstory or other essential details to the audience, rather than the backstory itself.